the thunderous crack of a pistol firing into the ceiling of Harper's barn sent splinters raining down as Sophia O'Malley pressed herself against the hay bales, her heart hammering against her ribs. Montana Territory, 1878, a place where fortunes were made and lives were lost with equal ease. And now, it seemed her fate hung in the balance as well. "Now, pretty lady," drawled the bandit, his face half hidden beneath a red bandana, eyes glittering with menace. "You're gonna tell me where that father of yours keeps his mining profits, or things are gonna get mighty unpleasant." Sophia's throat constricted with fear. At 22, she'd grown accustomed to the harshness of frontier life after moving west with her father following her mother's death 3 years prior. But nothing had prepared her for this moment, cornered in her family's barn by one of the notorious Blackwater gang that had been terrorizing the territory for months. "I told you," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "My father doesn't keep money on the property. Everything goes straight to the bank in Helena." The bandit's laugh was cold as he approached, boots crushing hay beneath them. "Now, that's where you're wrong, Miss O'Malley. Word has it your daddy made a mighty fine strike last month. That gold's somewhere on this property, and you're gonna show me where." Sophia's eyes darted toward the barn doors, calculating her chances of escape. They weren't good. The bandit was between her and the only exit, and she knew the rest of the gang was likely nearby. Her father was in town for supplies, not due back until tomorrow. The ranch hands were working the north pasture. No one would hear her scream. "I don't know anything about gold," she insisted, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "Please just take whatever you want from the house and leave." The bandit moved closer, his pistol now aimed directly at her chest. "What I want is that gold, and you're trying my patience." The creak of the barn door made them both freeze. Sophia's heart leapt with desperate hope as a tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun stepped inside. "I believe the lady asked you to leave," came a deep voice, steady as stone. Bryce Xavier stood in the doorway, his stance relaxed but purposeful, one hand resting near the holster on his hip. Sophia had seen him around town since his arrival a few months ago, the new ranch foreman at the neighboring Peterson place. They'd exchanged pleasantries at church socials and the general store, but little more. Now, his presence filled the barn like a shield. The bandit spun, his gun swinging toward the newcomer. "This ain't your business, cowboy. Best ride on if you value your life." Bryce stepped fully into the barn, his eyes briefly meeting Sophia's before returning to the bandit. The look in those blue depths sent an inexplicable wave of reassurance through her. "Well now, that's where you're wrong," Bryce replied, his voice deceptively casual. "When I see a lady in distress, it becomes my business, and from where I'm standing, you'll be leaving without her." The bandit's laugh was ugly. "There's one of you and one of me, and I've got my gun already drawn. What do you figure your odds are, cowboy?" "Better than you might think," Bryce answered. And that's when Sophia noticed the shotgun in his left hand, partially hidden by his duster but now raising steadily. "I figured your friends might be waiting outside, so I took the liberty of approaching from the back. They're currently having a conversation with the sheriff and his deputies." The bandit's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but the distant sound of shouting from the direction of the main road seemed to confirm Bryce's claim. "You're bluffing," the bandit hissed, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Care to wager your life on that?" Bryce asked, the shotgun now leveled at the outlaw's chest. "Drop the gun and kick it over." For a breathless moment, Sophia thought the bandit would shoot. His finger tightened on the trigger, his face contorted with rage. Then, with a muttered curse, he lowered his pistol and tossed it aside. "On your knees, hands behind your head," Bryce instructed. As the bandit complied, Bryce moved forward, keeping the shotgun trained on him while retrieving a length of rope from his belt. With practiced efficiency, he bound the outlaw's hands. Only then did he look fully at Sophia. "Are you hurt, Miss O'Malley?" She shook her head, suddenly aware of how badly she was trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. "No, I'm all right, thank you." Bryce's expression softened slightly. "Sheriff Thompson should be here shortly." "He was already on his way when I spotted this one's friends waiting by your property line." "How did you know to come here?" Sophia asked, finally finding her voice again. "I was riding fence on the north side of Peterson's property when I saw these fellas heading this way." Something didn't sit right. Too many men, moving too purposefully in the middle of a workday. "When I realized they were heading toward your place and your father was in town." He shrugged as if it had been the most natural thing in the world to ride into danger for someone he barely knew. The sound of approaching horses announced the sheriff's arrival. Moments later, Sheriff Thompson entered the barn, followed by 2 deputies. "Miss O'Malley," the sheriff greeted, tipping his hat before turning his attention to the bound outlaw. "Well, well, if it isn't Jeb Rawlins. Been looking for you and your friends for quite a spell." "You got the others?" Bryce asked. Sheriff Thompson nodded. "All 3 of them. Didn't put up much of a fight once they realized they were surrounded." He cast an appreciative glance at Bryce. "Quick thinking, sending that ranch hand to fetch us when you did." Sophia looked at Bryce with new understanding. He hadn't been bluffing after all. He'd somehow managed to alert the sheriff while tracking the bandits to her property. As the deputies hauled the bandit to his feet, Sheriff Thompson turned to Sophia. "Would you like me to send someone to fetch your father from town, Miss O'Malley?" "No," Sophia replied, gathering her composure. "He'll be back tomorrow. I can manage until then." The sheriff looked skeptical. "These might not be all of Rawlins' gang. Might not be safe for you to stay alone." Before Sophia could respond, Bryce spoke up. "I'd be happy to keep watch tonight if Miss O'Malley permits it. I can send word to Mr. Peterson explaining the situation." The sheriff nodded approvingly, but Sophia hesitated. While grateful for Bryce's intervention, the idea of spending the night with a man she barely knew wasn't something she could agree to lightly, no matter how honorable his intentions seemed. Reading her hesitation, Bryce quickly added, "I'd stay in the bunkhouse with your ranch hands, of course, just as an extra pair of eyes." Relief washed over her. "That would be most appreciated, Mr. Xavier. Thank you." As the sheriff and his deputies departed with their prisoner, the barn fell quiet. Sophia found herself alone with her rescuer, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance and the hay clinging to her skirts. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, smoothing her hands over her dress. "If you hadn't arrived when you did." "No need for thanks," Bryce replied, his expression warm but respectful. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Sophia said with quiet certainty. "Not anyone would have ridden straight into danger for a neighbor they barely know." Something flickered in Bryce's eyes, a moment of vulnerability that vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "Perhaps I'd like to know that neighbor better," he said softly, then quickly added, "but that's a conversation for another time. You've had quite a shock. Let me walk you back to the house." As they stepped out into the late afternoon sunlight, Sophia felt the weight of what had just happened and what had nearly happened settle fully upon her. Her knees weakened, and she stumbled slightly. Bryce's hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy now," he murmured. His touch was gentle but strong, and Sophia found herself leaning into his support more than strictly necessary. There was something about Bryce Xavier that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't since her mother died, since her whole world had shifted, and she'd found herself transplanted to this wild, beautiful, dangerous territory. "I'll be fine," she assured him. though she didn't pull away immediately. "It's just been quite a day." Bryce's smile was understanding. "That it has, Miss O'Malley, that it has." As they walked toward the house, Sophia couldn't help but wonder if this day, terrifying as it had been, might mark the beginning of something she hadn't known she was waiting for. The main house of the O'Malley ranch stood solid and welcoming against the backdrop of rolling Montana hills. Built from sturdy timber harvested from the nearby mountains, it wasn't as grand as some, but it spoke of hard work and determination, much like the man who had built it. Thomas O'Malley had brought his daughter west after his wife's passing, determined to build a new life for them both. Sophia led Bryce onto the wide front porch. "Please, come in. I should at least offer you some coffee after what you've done." Inside, the house was modestly furnished but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Sophia busied herself at the cast iron stove, grateful for the familiar task to steady her still shaking hands. Bryce remained near the door, hat in hand, his tall frame making the room seem somehow smaller. "This is a fine place you and your father have," he commented, his eyes taking in the details: the patchwork quilt draped over the back of a rocking chair, the shelves of books along one wall, the carefully preserved daguerreotype of a woman with Sophia's eyes. "Thank you," Sophia replied, measuring coffee into the pot. "It's not what we had back east, but it's become home." She hesitated, then added, "Father's done well with the mine, better than we expected when we came out here." "Is that why they targeted your place?" Bryce asked. "Word of your father's strike getting around." Sophia nodded, her back still to him as she worked. "Father tried to keep it quiet, but you know how news travels. The Bandit Rollins, did the sheriff call him? He seemed certain we were keeping gold here. Are you?" Bryce asked, then quickly added, "Not that it's my business." Sophia turned to face him, a small smile playing at her lips despite the events of the day. "No, Mr. Xavier, we're not quite that foolish. Father takes everything straight to the bank in Helena. There's nothing here worth dying for." Something in Bryce's expression made her breath catch a look that said perhaps he didn't entirely agree with her last statement, but he simply nodded, his eyes dropping to the hat in his hands. "Coffee's nearly ready," she said, turning back to the stove. "Please sit down." When she brought the coffee to the table, she found him examining a small wooden carving on the mantelpiece, a delicate horse that her father had made for her 16th birthday. "This is fine work," he commented, carefully setting it back. "My father made it," Sophia explained, placing 2 steaming cups on the table. "He has a gift for working with his hands. The mine was lucky, but the carpentry, that's where his heart is." Bryce settled into a chair across from her, his movements fluid and controlled. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though his expression now remained serious. "How long have you been in Montana territory?" she asked, wrapping her hands around her cup. "Going on 8 months," he replied. "Came up from Colorado after." He paused, something darkening in his eyes. After deciding it was time for a change. Sophia sensed there was more to his story, something painful perhaps, but didn't press. Everyone who came west carried something, whether running toward a dream or away from a past. "And how do you find it here?" she asked instead. "Beautiful country," he answered, his gaze lifting to the window where the late afternoon sun painted the hills in gold. "Harsh at times, but honest in its harshness. A man knows where he stands with this land. Unlike with people," she ventured. A half-smile touched his lips. "You're perceptive, Miss O'Malley." "Sophia," she corrected. "After what happened today, I think we can dispense with some formalities." He inclined his head slightly. "Sophia, then, and I'm Bryce." A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee. Outside, the ranch hands were returning from the north pasture, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in their absence. "I should go speak with your foreman," Bryce said, rising. "Let him know what happened and that I'll be staying the night." Sophia stood as well. "Of course. And I should prepare some supper. You're welcome to join us in the house rather than eating in the bunkhouse." Something like surprise flickered across his face before he nodded. "I'd be honored." As he headed toward the door, Sophia found herself saying, "Bryce." When he turned, she continued, "I truly don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along today. Her voice caught unexpectedly. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate." Bryce's expression softened. "Sometimes being in the right place at the right time is its own reward, Sophia." After he left, Sophia stood motionless in the middle of the room, the events of the day crashing over her anew. She'd been in genuine danger, might have been killed or worse, and a man she barely knew had risked his life to save her. The realization made her legs weak again, and she sank back into her chair, allowing herself a moment of delayed fear now that she was alone. When the trembling subsided, she rose with new determination. She had guests to feed and work to do. Life on the frontier didn't allow for extended periods of shock or self-pity. Tomorrow her father would return, and they would face whatever came next together as they always had. But as she began preparing supper, she couldn't help but wonder about the quiet cowboy who had stepped into her life so unexpectedly. There was a story there in his guarded eyes and careful words, and Sophia O'Malley had always loved a good story. Supper that evening was a livelier affair than Sophia had anticipated. The ranch foreman, Dan Murphy, and the three hands who worked the O'Malley spread had listened to Bryce's account of the afternoon's events with growing amazement, and no small amount of self-recrimination for having been too far away to help. "Should have split the crew today," Murphy said, shaking his head as he accepted a second helping of Sophia's beef stew. "Left someone closer to the house." "You couldn't have known," Sophia assured him, "and everything turned out all right in the end." "Thanks to Mr. Xavier here," Murphy replied, raising his coffee cup in Bryce's direction. "Mighty fine shooting from what the boys at the Peterson place tell me." Bryce accepted the compliment with a modest nod. "Just fortunate I spotted them in time." Sophia observed how easily he deflected praise, how comfortable he seemed at her table despite being among virtual strangers. There was a quiet confidence about him that didn't tip into arrogance, a rare quality in the men she'd encountered since coming west. As the meal progressed, the conversation turned to more general topics: the unusually wet spring they'd been having, predictions for the summer grazing, news from the territorial capital. Bryce spoke little but listened attentively, occasionally offering a thoughtful comment that revealed a mind more educated than many in their part of the territory. When the meal concluded, Murphy and the hands excused themselves, returning to the bunkhouse with promises to keep a sharp watch through the night. Sophia began clearing the table, waving away Bryce's offer of help. "Please sit," she insisted. "You've done quite enough for one day." To her surprise, he ignored her directive and began gathering plates anyway. "My mother would have my hide if I sat while a lady cleared the table alone," he said, a hint of humor warming his voice. Side by side at the wash basin, they fell into an unexpectedly comfortable rhythm, Sophia washing, Bryce drying. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly, making her cheeks warm. "You mentioned you came from back east," Bryce said, carefully placing a dried plate on the shelf. "Whereabouts?" "Boston," Sophia replied. "My father had a carpentry shop there, a good business, but after my mother passed." She trailed off, then continued more softly, "Too many memories, I suppose, and he'd always dreamed of the West." "And you, did you share his dream?" Sophia considered the question honestly. Not at first. I thought he was running away, that we both were. I resented leaving everything I knew. She paused in her washing, staring out the kitchen window at the Montana twilight. But now, I can't imagine being anywhere else. There's a freedom here that I never knew in Boston. Freedom, Bryce repeated thoughtfully. Yes, that's part of what drew me too. The space to breathe, to become whoever you choose to be without the weight of the past pressing down. There it was again, that hint of something left behind, some burden he carried. Sophia's curiosity deepened, but she restrained herself from asking directly. "And your family?" she inquired instead. "Are they still in Colorado?" A shadow passed across his face. "No. My parents died when I was 18. Influenza. My younger sister married a shopkeeper in Denver 2 years ago." "I'm sorry about your parents," Sophia said quietly. Bryce nodded his acknowledgement. "It was a long time ago now." They finished the dishes in silence. But it wasn't uncomfortable, rather. It felt like the easy quiet of long acquaintance. With the kitchen set to rights, they moved to the sitting area near the fireplace. The spring evening had turned cool, and Sophia added another log to the fire while Bryce lit the oil lamps. "I should probably head to the bunkhouse," he said, though he made no immediate move to leave. "There's no rush," Sophia replied, settling into her father's armchair. "Unless you're tired from your day of heroics." A genuine smile broke across his face at her teasing tone, transforming his features and making him look younger. "Not too tired for good company." The conversation flowed more easily now, as if the shared task of cleaning up after supper had broken down some invisible barrier between them. Sophia found herself telling him about her life in Boston, about the shock of adjusting to frontier life, about her father's transition from carpenter to miner. In turn, Bryce spoke of his years working cattle in Colorado, his decision to move north, his hopes of someday having his own spread. What he didn't speak of was whatever had prompted his move from Colorado, the change he had earlier alluded to needing. Sophia noticed the omission but respected it. Everyone had parts of themselves they kept private, especially out here where so many came seeking fresh starts. When the grandfather clock in the corner struck 10, Bryce finally rose to leave. "I've kept you up late enough," he said, "and you've had quite a day." Sophia walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Thank you again, for everything." He paused on the threshold, the lamplight catching the angles of his face. "I'll ride into town first thing tomorrow to meet your father's stage and explain what happened. No sense in him coming home to an empty house and worrying." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. "That's very kind." "Not at all," he replied, "just being neighborly." There was a moment, brief but unmistakable, when something passed between them, a current of awareness of possibility. Then Bryce stepped back, settling his hat on his head. "Good night, Sophia," he said softly. "Good night, Bryce," she answered. "Sleep well." After he left, Sophia secured the door and moved through the house, checking windows and extinguishing lamps. Her father had installed sturdy locks after they moved in, an unusual precaution for a frontier home where doors often stood open to travelers, but one that had served them well today. In her bedroom, she changed into her nightgown and sat at her small vanity to brush her hair. The face that looked back at her from the mirror seemed different somehow, her eyes brighter, her cheeks flushed. The day's fear had left its mark, certainly, but there was something else there too: interest, curiosity, perhaps even the first fluttering of attraction. Sophia set down her brush with a small laugh at herself. One day of excitement, and she was letting her imagination run wild. Bryce Xavier was simply being a good neighbor, as he'd said. That he was handsome and kind didn't mean anything more. Still, As she slipped between the cool sheets of her bed, she found herself wondering what it might be like to know him better, to discover the stories he kept hidden behind those watchful blue eyes. And for the first time since moving to Montana Territory, Sophia fell asleep thinking not of the life she'd left behind in Boston, but of possibilities that might lie ahead. Thomas O'Malley returned the following day on the noon stage, his weathered face creased with worry after Bryce's account of what had transpired in his absence. Despite Sophia's reassurances that she was unharmed, her father moved through the house like a man seeking evidence of wounds he couldn't see, his eyes following her with a mixture of guilt and relief. "I never should have left you alone," he said for the third time as they sat at the kitchen table, Bryce having excused himself to give father and daughter privacy for their reunion. "Father, please," Sophia said gently. "You couldn't have known." "And I wasn't alone. The hands were here, just not close enough to the house at the time." Thomas ran a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "If anything had happened to you—" "But it didn't," Sophia reminded him. "Thanks to Mr. Xavier. Yes, this Xavier fellow." Thomas's expression grew thoughtful. "Seems I owe him a great debt. Peterson speaks highly of him, says he's the best foreman he's had in years." "He was very brave," Sophia agreed, trying to keep her tone neutral despite the warmth that spread through her at the memory of Bryce standing in the barn doorway, steady as a mountain against danger. Her father's sharp eyes caught something in her expression. "He's a handsome man, your rescuer." "Father," Sophia protested, feeling her cheeks flush. Thomas's laugh was gentle. "I may be getting older, but my eyes still work just fine." He reached across the table to pat her hand. "I've asked him to stay for supper tonight. Seems the least we can do to thank him properly." "That's thoughtful of you," Sophia managed, both pleased and flustered at the prospect of seeing Bryce again so soon. Thomas's smile turned knowing. "I thought you might approve." The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Thomas insisted on riding into town again to speak with Sheriff Thompson, wanting first-hand details about the bandits' capture and what was being done to ensure they wouldn't trouble the area again. Sophia used the time to bake an apple pie, a small extravagance given their limited supply of sugar, but one she felt was warranted under the circumstances. As she worked, her mind kept returning to Bryce, to their conversation by the fire, to the ease she'd felt in his company despite having just met him under such dramatic circumstances. There was something about him that inspired trust, yet also curiosity. A steadiness that suggested depth rather than simplicity. When evening approached, Sophia found herself paying more attention to her appearance than usual, choosing her blue dress, the one her father always said matched her eyes, and pinning her dark hair in a style that framed her face more softly than her typical practical arrangement. "Well now," Thomas said when she emerged from her room, "don't you look lovely this evening?" Sophia brushed away the compliment with a smile, but secretly pleased that her efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. Bryce arrived precisely at 6, hat in hand, his tall frame filling the doorway. He'd clearly made an effort, as well his clothes were freshly brushed, hair still damp from washing. "Mr. Xavier," Thomas greeted him warmly, extending his hand. "I understand I owe you my daughter's safety." "Sir," Bryce replied, his handshake firm. "I was just fortunate to be riding by at the right time." "Fortunate indeed," Thomas agreed. "Please come in. Sophia has prepared quite a feast." Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Thomas dominating much of the conversation with tales from his trip to Helena. Sophia was content to observe the interaction between the two men, noting how her father seemed to genuinely like Bryce, drawing him out with questions about his experience with cattle and his thoughts on the territory's future. "Peterson tells me you're hoping to have your own spread someday," Thomas remarked as they lingered over coffee and Sophia's apple pie. Bryce nodded. Yes, sir. I've been saving. Land prices being what they are, it might take another year or two, but that's the plan. Admirable goal, Thomas said approvingly. A man should have something of his own to build on. He glanced at Sophia with unmistakable paternal pride. That's what I've tried to do for my daughter here, create something that will give her security, no matter what happens. Father, Sophia said with gentle exasperation, you make it sound as if I'm some delicate flower needing constant protection. Not delicate, no, Thomas conceded with a smile. But a father worries nonetheless, especially after yesterday's events. If I may, Bryce interjected carefully, your daughter handled herself with remarkable composure yesterday. Many would have lost their heads in such a situation. The compliment, delivered with such sincerity, warmed Sophia more than she cared to admit. Thank you, Bryce. Though I confess, my composure was largely for show. Inside, I was terrified. That makes your coolness all the more impressive, he replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. True courage isn't the absence of fear, but facing it nonetheless. Thomas looked between them with barely concealed interest. Well said, Mr. Xavier. He pushed back his chair. Now, I hope you'll excuse an old man for retiring early. The journey from Helena was longer than I remembered, and these bones aren't as young as they once were. Father, it's barely 8 o'clock, Sophia pointed out, suspicious of his sudden fatigue. Thomas winked at her as he stood. Is it? My, how time flies in good company. He extended his hand to Bryce again. Thank you again for what you did. You're welcome in our home anytime. After Thomas retired, a momentary awkwardness descended. Sophia busied herself clearing the dessert plates, aware of Bryce watching her movements. Can I help? He offered, rising from his chair. No need, she assured him. But perhaps you'd like to sit on the porch. The evening's mild, and it seems a shame to be indoors. Outside, the Montana spring evening was indeed perfect, cool enough to be comfortable, but without the bite of winter. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the distant mountains stood like sentinels against the horizon. They sat side by side on the porch swing, a respectable distance between them, though Sophia was acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of soap and leather, the quiet rhythm of his breathing. Your father is a good man, Bryce said after a comfortable silence. The best, Sophia agreed. Though subtlety isn't his strong suit, at Bryce's questioning look she laughed. His sudden exhaustion wasn't entirely convincing. Understanding dawned on Bryce's face, followed by a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Ah, so that was. He cleared his throat. Well. I apologize if he made you uncomfortable, Sophia said quickly. Not at all, Bryce assured her. I'm flattered, if anything. Another silence fell between them, this one charged with unspoken possibilities. Will you tell me, Sophia finally asked, what brought you to Montana? The real reason. Bryce's expression grew more serious. He gazed out at the darkening land for so long that Sophia thought he might not answer. I killed a man, he said finally, his voice so quiet she almost didn't hear him. Sophia's breath caught, but she remained still, waiting. It was self-defense, he continued. He drew on me first, but afterward. He shook his head. He had family. A brother who swore revenge. I could have stayed, faced him, but there would have been more bloodshed. I decided it was better to leave, give everyone time to cool down. I'm sorry, Sophia said softly. That's a heavy burden to carry. Bryce turned to look at her then, surprise evident in his expression. You're not afraid, shocked, should I be? She asked. You've proven your character in how you acted yesterday and out here. Well, sometimes violence finds us whether we seek it or not. He studied her face in the fading light as if searching for something. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, for some of the tension left his shoulders. "Thank you for understanding," he said simply. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth," she replied. The porch swing swayed gently as a comfortable silence settled between them again. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonesome cry echoing across the valley. "I should go," Bryce said eventually, though he made no move to stand. "Peterson will be wondering where I am." "Of course," Sophia agreed. Equally reluctant to end the evening, when he finally rose, she walked with him to where his horse was tethered. The animal nickered softly as Bryce approached, nuzzling his hand in greeting. "You have a way with horses," Sophia observed. "They are easier to understand than people sometimes," he replied, stroking the gelding's neck. "Honest in their needs and reactions. Unlike people. Some people are honest," he said, his gaze returning to her face. "Some are as true as the North Star." The compliment hung in the night air between them, sincere and unadorned. Sophia felt her pulse quicken. "I'd like to call on you properly," Bryce said suddenly. "With your father's permission, of course." The directness of the request surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Bryce Xavier didn't seem the type for games or pretense. "I'd like that," she answered, her voice steadier than the flutter in her chest would suggest. His smile in response was worth any risk of seeming too eager. "Good, that's good." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, settling into the saddle as if born to it. Looking down at her, his expression was warm yet respectful. "Good night, Sophia O'Malley," he said softly. "Good night, Bryce Xavier," she replied. "Ride safe." She watched him until horse and rider disappeared into the darkness, then turned back toward the house, a smile playing at her lips that had nothing to do with the beauty of the Montana night. The following weeks brought a gradual shifting in Sophia's world, as subtle and inevitable as the changing of seasons. True to his word, Bryce called on her first, securing Thomas's permission, which was granted with barely concealed enthusiasm. Their courtship unfolded with a deliberate care that Sophia found both refreshing and occasionally frustrating. Bryce would ride over on Sunday afternoons after church, sometimes accompanying her and Thomas on drives through the countryside. Other times simply sitting with her on the porch, talking as the sun made its slow arc across the Montana sky. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers gathered on his rides, a beautifully carved wooden box he'd made himself during the winter evenings, a ribbon from the general store that perfectly matched her blue dress. Nothing extravagant, but each gift thoughtfully chosen. In turn, Sophia found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that made the intervening days seem longer. She learned to recognize the sound of his horse's particular gait, could distinguish his knock from others without seeing who stood on the porch. Small things, insignificant perhaps, but they accumulated like river stones, smooth, polished evidence of something building between them. They spoke of everything and nothing: their childhoods, their dreams, books they'd read, places they hoped to see. Bryce had a quiet wit that surprised her at times, drawing unexpected laughter. Sophia found herself sharing thoughts she'd previously kept private: her occasional homesickness for Boston's cultural refinements, her secret desire to someday see the Pacific Ocean. Yet for all their growing closeness, Bryce maintained a physical reserve that both honored her and tested her patience. He never took liberties beyond occasionally holding her hand while walking, or helping her down from the wagon with hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. His restraint spoke of respect, but Sophia sometimes caught a look in his eyes that suggested the restraint cost him. One golden afternoon in late May, they rode to a high meadow overlooking the valley. The wildflowers were at their peak, lupine and paintbrush, creating swathes of purple and orange against the green. They had packed a simple picnic, and after they ate, Sophia leaned back on the blanket, shading her eyes as she watched hawks circling lazily above. "I could stay here forever," she said contentedly. "It's perfect." Bryce, sitting beside her, smiled. "Not quite forever. Storms coming." He nodded toward the western horizon where dark clouds were building over the distant mountains. Sophia sighed. "Must you be so practical?" "I was having a poetic moment." "My apologies," he laughed. "Please continue with your poetry. I'll remind you when the rain starts." She swatted his arm playfully, then sat up to look at the approaching weather. "How long do you think we have?" "An hour, maybe less," he estimated. "We should probably head back soon." Neither made a move to pack up, however. The coming storm created a sense of suspended time, these moments more precious for their inevitable end. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Sophia said suddenly, turning to face him. Bryce raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a request." "I know," she admitted, "but I want to know you really know you." He considered for a moment, his eyes on the distant storm clouds. "When I was 12, he began slowly, "my father lost our farm in Illinois. Bad investments, bad luck with the harvest. We had to move west with almost nothing. He never really recovered from the shame of it." He paused. "I swore then that I'd never put my family in that position, that I'd build something solid, something that would last." The admission, simple yet revealing, touched Sophia deeply. It explained so much about him, his careful saving, his determination to have his own land. "Your turn," he said, his eyes returning to her face. Sophia took a breath. Fair was fair. "Sometimes I resent my father for bringing me here," she confessed. "Even though I've grown to love Montana, even though I understand why we left Boston. There are days when I feel like I'm living his dream instead of my own." As soon as the words left her mouth, she wished she could recall them. They sounded ungrateful, childish, but Bryce nodded thoughtfully. "That's natural, I think. We all need to feel we're charting our own course." He reached out to take her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her skin. "And what is your dream, Sophia O'Malley?" The question hung in the air between them, more intimate somehow than any physical touch. Sophia looked down at their joined hands, gathering her courage. "To build a life with someone I love," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "To create something that's truly ours, not my father's vision, not Boston society's expectations. Something real." When she looked up, the intensity in Bryce's eyes made her breath catch. He moved closer, his free hand coming up to gently trace the line of her jaw. "May I kiss you, Sophia?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. His lips were warm against hers, the kiss tender yet purposeful, a promise of sorts. Her hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they broke apart, Sophia found herself trembling slightly, though not from fear or cold. Bryce's eyes searched hers, a question in their depths. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "I need you to know that." The directness of the declaration, so like him, made her smile even as tears pricked at her eyes. "I'm falling in love with you too." His answering smile was like sunrise, transforming his entire face. He leaned in to kiss her again, more confidently this time, his hand sliding to the small of her back to draw her closer. A distant rumble of thunder reminded them of the approaching storm, reluctantly breaking the moment. Bryce glanced at the darkening sky with obvious regret. "We really should head back," he said. They packed up the picnic quickly, the air around them charged with new awareness. As Bryce helped her onto her horse, his hands lingered at her waist, his eyes holding hers with unmistakable meaning. I meant what I said, he told her. This isn't casual for me. Nor for me, she assured him. They rode back to the O'Malley ranch at a steady pace, racing the storm clouds that followed at their heels. The first fat raindrops began to fall just as they reached the barn, sending them hurrying inside with breathless laughter. Inside the wooden structure, the sudden drumming of rain on the roof created a cocoon of sound around them. Sophia was struck by the symmetry this barn where their story had begun 3 weeks earlier, when Bryce had faced down a bandit to save her. Now they stood in the same space, but everything had changed. Quite a storm, Bryce observed, moving to secure the doors against the wind that was picking up strength. Sophia nodded, suddenly shy in the dimness of the barn. Her lips still tingled from his kisses, her mind still processing the declarations they'd made to each other. When Bryce turned back to her, his expression was serious despite the smile that played at the corners of his mouth. I should speak to your father. The implication was clear, sending a flutter of excitement through Sophia's chest. Yes, she agreed softly, you should. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms with a certainty that made her feel both protected and desired. This kiss was different from the ones they'd shared in the meadow, deeper, more urgent, as if the storm outside had somehow worked its way into them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Bryce rested his forehead against hers. I should go inside and talk to him now before I lose my nerve. Sophia laughed. You, nervous? The man who faced down an armed bandit without blinking. That was different, he insisted. Asking a man for his daughter's hand. That takes real courage. The simple honesty of the statement made her heart swell with affection. He already approves of you, you know. He's been dropping hints since the day you rescued me. Still, Bryce said, reluctantly releasing her. There are proper ways to do things. They left the barn together, making a dash through the rain to the house. On the porch, Bryce paused, raindrops glistening in his dark hair as he looked down at her with an expression that warmed her despite her damp clothes. I'll come by tomorrow, he promised, to speak with your father. Sophia nodded, happiness bubbling within her like a spring. Tomorrow, then, but tomorrow brought unexpected complications. Sophia awoke to find her father already gone. A note explaining he'd ridden to town on urgent business regarding the mine. By mid-morning, dark rumors began circulating the bank in Helena had collapsed, taking with it the savings of many in the territory, including a significant portion of Thomas O'Malley's mining profits. When Bryce arrived that afternoon, he found Sophia pale with worry, pacing the front room as she waited for her father's return. What's happened? He asked, immediately sensing her distress. Sophia explained what little she knew, her hands twisting anxiously. Father's been so careful, saving everything from the mine. If it's true, if the banks really failed. Hey, Bryce said gently, taking her hands in his. Whatever happens, you'll get through it. Your father's a resourceful man. His steadiness calmed her somewhat, though the worry remained. They sat together on the porch, watching the road for signs of Thomas's return, their previous plans temporarily set aside in the face of this new uncertainty. It was nearly dusk when Thomas finally rode in, his face lined with fatigue but not, Sophia noted with relief, despair. Father. She called, hurrying to meet him as he dismounted. Is it true about the bank? Thomas nodded grimly. It's true enough. Helena City Bank is finished, doors closed yesterday. Your savings? Bryce asked quietly, having followed Sophia to the yard. Thomas's expression softened slightly as he looked at the younger man. Not as bad as it might have been. I was cautious after the last panic, kept a good portion in a bank in San Francisco. We've lost some, but not everything. Relief washed over Sophia. Thank goodness. Indeed, Thomas agreed. Though many weren't so fortunate, Peterson among them, I'm afraid. Bryce's expression grew concerned. How bad? Bad enough, Thomas sighed. He had everything in Helena City Bank, everything. He shook his head sadly. He's talking about selling the ranch if he can't find another solution quickly. The news hit Bryce hard. Sophia could see it in the sudden tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his mouth. Peterson's ranch was his livelihood, his home for the past 8 months. I should go, he said, his voice carefully controlled. He'll need all hands tonight. Sophia wanted to protest, to remind him of what he'd planned to ask her father, but she understood his sense of duty. Of course, she said instead. Will you come tomorrow? As soon as I can, he promised, though his mind was clearly already turning to the crisis at his employer's ranch. As they watched him ride away, Thomas put an arm around his daughter's shoulders. That's a good man, he said quietly. The kind who puts others before himself. I know, Sophia replied, leaning into her father's embrace. I love him. Thomas smiled down at her, unsurprised. I know you do, child. And unless I'm greatly mistaken, he feels the same. The following days brought a flurry of activity and uncertainty. Peterson's financial troubles proved even worse than initially feared. Not only had he lost his savings, but he'd also taken loans against the ranch that he now couldn't repay. The bank's collapse had triggered a cascade of economic problems throughout the territory. Bryce worked from dawn until well after dusk, helping Peterson try to salvage what he could. His visits to Sophia became brief and infrequent, snatched moments when he could get away, often arriving exhausted, sometimes still wearing the dust of the day's work. Yet even in these stolen intervals, their connection deepened. There was a new gravity to their conversations, a shared understanding that life could change in an instant. The bank's failure had cast a shadow over the entire community, reminding everyone of the precarious nature of frontier existence. Nearly 2 weeks after the bank's collapse, Bryce arrived at the O'Malley ranch looking more tired than Sophia had ever seen him. He'd lost weight, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. You're working too hard, she chided gently, leading him to the kitchen table where she poured him a cup of coffee. No choice, he replied, gratefully accepting the cup. Peterson's selling off half the herd to cover the most pressing debts. We've been moving cattle for days. And after that, Sophia asked, taking the seat across from him. Will it be enough? Bryce shook his head. No, he'll have to sell the ranch. He's already had an offer from a cattle company out of Wyoming. I'm sorry, Sophia said softly, reaching across the table to take his hand. I know how much you care about the place. It's not just that, he admitted, his voice rough with fatigue. This changes everything, Sophia. My plans, my future. He trailed off, staring into his coffee, a cold knot formed in Sophia's stomach. Our future, you mean? His eyes lifted to meet hers, filled with conflict. I want that more than anything. You know I do, but I can't. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I can't offer you anything right now. With Peterson selling, I'll be out of work. My savings aren't enough for the kind of land I'd need. I don't care about that, Sophia insisted, tightening her grip on his hand. We'll figure it out together. Bryce's smile was sad. Your father didn't bring you all the way out here just to see you struggle. You deserve better than a man with empty pockets and uncertain prospects. That's not for you to decide, she countered, an edge entering her voice. I deserve to make my own choices about what I want. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the kitchen window, Sophia saw her father riding in with 2 other men, strangers in suits that marked them as city men rather than ranchers. I should go, Bryce said, rising from the table. You have visitors. Stay, Sophia urged, not wanting to end their conversation on such an uncertain note. Please. But Bryce was already moving toward the door. I need to get back to Peterson's. We're moving the last of the cattle tomorrow. At the threshold, he paused, his expression softening as he looked at her. I'm not giving up, Sophia. I just need time to figure things out. Before she could respond, he was gone, slipping out the back door as her father and his guests approached the front of the house. Sophia took a moment to compose herself, pushing aside her frustration and worry to greet the visitors with the hospitality expected of her. The men, it turned out, were mining investors from San Francisco, interested in potentially partnering with her father to expand his operation. As she served coffee and listened to their discussions of capital investments and ore yields, Sophia found her mind continually returning to Bryce. His reluctance to move forward with their relationship in the face of financial uncertainty both frustrated and worried her. She understood his pride, his desire to provide securely, but feared he might let that pride drive a wedge between them. Later that evening, after the investors had departed for their hotel in town, Sophia sat with her father on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. "You're unusually quiet," Thomas observed, puffing on his pipe. "Something troubling you?" Sophia hesitated, then decided directness was best. "It's Bryce. With Peterson selling the ranch, he's pulling away, talking about not having enough to offer me." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "A man's pride is a tricky thing, especially a good man's pride. But it's foolishness," Sophia insisted. "I don't need wealth. We could start small, build together." "Have you told him that?" "I tried," she sighed. "He didn't really listen." Thomas tapped his pipe against the porch railing, considering. "You know, those investors today, they mentioned something interesting. The cattle company buying Peterson's place. They're looking for a skilled foreman to manage it, someone who knows the land and the stock. They asked if I knew of anyone suitable." Sophia straightened, hope flickering. "Did you tell them about Bryce?" "I did," Thomas confirmed. "They seemed quite interested, especially when I mentioned his background in Colorado." "Father, that's wonderful," Sophia exclaimed, then paused as a thought occurred to her. "But will Bryce accept? He's always talked about having his own land, not managing someone else's." "It would be a step toward that goal," Thomas pointed out. "The salary they are offering is generous, and it would keep him here near you." Sophia leaned over to kiss her father's cheek. "Thank you for thinking of him." Thomas patted her hand affectionately. "I'm thinking of you both, child. You deserve happiness, and that young man makes you happy. I can see it plain as day." "I love him," Sophia said simply. "I know," her father replied. "Now you just need to make sure he doesn't let pride get in the way of that love." The next day, Sophia rode to the Peterson ranch, determined to speak with Bryce directly. She found the place in organized chaos, cowboys moving among the remaining cattle, wagons being loaded with household goods, Peterson himself directing the activity with the grim efficiency of a man doing what must be done. She spotted Bryce near the corral, deep in conversation with one of the ranch hands. Even at a distance, she could see the tension in his posture, the weight of responsibility he carried. When he saw her approaching, surprise and pleasure warred briefly on his face before he excused himself from the conversation and walked to meet her. "Sophia," he greeted her, "you shouldn't be here today. It's not safe with all the cattle being moved." "I needed to see you," she replied, dismounting, "and I have news." Bryce took the reins of her horse, his expression questioning. "News?" Sophia quickly explained about the investors and the cattle company's need for a foreman. "They want someone who knows the land, who has experience with the herds. Father recommended you." Bryce's reaction wasn't the immediate enthusiasm she'd hoped for. Instead, he frowned slightly, his gaze drifting toward the main house where Peterson was visible on the porch. "It's a good opportunity," Sophia continued when he remained silent. "The pay is excellent and you'd still be working with cattle just as you love. Managing someone else's land," Bryce said finally. "Not building something of my own." Frustration flared within her. "It's a beginning, not an ending. A step toward what you want." "What I want," he repeated, his eyes returning to her face, "is to give you the life you deserve, not to have you tied to a foreman living in a company cabin." "What I deserve," Sophia countered, her voice rising slightly, "is to be with the man I love. The rest is just details." Something in her words seemed to reach him. His expression softened, a glimmer of hope appearing in his eyes. "You really mean that, don't you?" "Of course I do," she insisted. "Bryce, I don't care about money or position. I care about you, your kindness, your courage, your heart. That's what I fell in love with." He moved closer, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "I've been a fool, haven't I?" "A bit," she agreed, unable to keep a smile from spreading across her face. His answering smile was like breaking dawn after a long night. "I love you, Sophia O'Malley, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "Then that's all that matters," she said softly. "The rest we'll figure out together." Bryce pulled her into his arms then, regardless of who might be watching, and kissed her with a fervor that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'll speak to your father tonight," he promised. "Properly this time. He'll say yes," Sophia assured him. "He already considers you family." The sound of Peterson calling Bryce's name reluctantly separated them. "I have to go," he said apologetically. "But I'll come by as soon as we're done here." "I'll be waiting," Sophia replied, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. As she rode home, the Montana landscape seemed more vibrant somehow, the grass greener, the sky more intensely blue. Change was coming, certainly, but change that would bring them together rather than drive them apart. That evening, as promised, Bryce arrived at the O'Malley home. Sophia watched from the window as her father met him on the porch, the two men speaking earnestly before Thomas clapped Bryce on the shoulder with obvious approval. When they came inside, both were smiling broadly. Thomas winked at his daughter before announcing he had some ledgers to review in his study, leaving the young couple alone in the parlor. Bryce crossed to where Sophia stood, taking both her hands in his. "Your father has given us his blessing," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "He's also told me more about the foreman position. It's a good opportunity, better than I first thought." "I'm glad," Sophia said, squeezing his hands encouragingly. "There's more," Bryce continued. "The company is offering a parcel of land as part of the arrangement, 50 acres that would be mine after 5 years of service. It's not a huge spread, but it's enough to start something of our own eventually." Joy bloomed in Sophia's chest. "That's wonderful." "It is," he agreed, "but not as wonderful as this." He released her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the lamplight, a simple gold ring with a modest diamond at its center. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice growing rough with emotion. "I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for the right person to give it to." Sophia's breath caught as he lowered himself to one knee before her, the ring held between them like a promise. "Sophia O'Malley," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "From the moment I saw you in that barn, facing danger with such courage, I knew you were someone special. The more I've come to know you, the more certain I've become that you're the one I want to share my life with." He paused, drawing a steadying breath. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Sophia whispered, tears of happiness blurring her vision. "Yes, Bryce Xavier, I will marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms. Their kiss was both tender and passionate, a seal on the promise they'd made to each other. When they finally broke apart, Sophia rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "When did you get the ring?" she asked. "You've been working non-stop for days." "I rode into town last night," he admitted. "After our conversation yesterday, I realized I was letting fear guide me instead of love. I couldn't risk losing you over pride or uncertainty about the future." Thomas's voice from the study doorway interrupted them. "I believe this calls for a celebration," he announced, holding up a bottle of fine whiskey he usually reserved for special occasions. As her father poured 3 small glasses, Sophia found herself overcome with a happiness so complete it was almost overwhelming. From the moment that Bandit had cornered her in the barn, her life had taken an unexpected turn, leading her not to danger but to love. Thomas raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he proposed. "And to family," Bryce added, his arm around Sophia's waist. "To love," Sophia concluded, her heart full as their glasses clinked together in the warm lamplight of the home that would soon belong to all of them. The wedding of Sophia O'Malley and Bryce Xavier took place on a perfect June day, 6 weeks after their engagement. The ceremony was held on the O'Malley property, beneath a canopy of cottonwood trees that rustled gently in the summer breeze. Nearly everyone in the territory attended, ranchers and miners, shopkeepers and cowboys, all gathered to celebrate a love story that had already become something of a local legend. Sophia wore a gown of ivory silk that her father had ordered specially from San Francisco, with lace that had once belonged to her mother. As she walked toward Bryce on her father's arm, she thought he had never looked more handsome, tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she approached. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken with clear voices that carried across the assembled guests. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Bryce's kiss was both tender and possessive, a declaration to everyone present that this remarkable woman was now his partner in all things. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing, abundant food and flowing drinks. Thomas O'Malley moved among the guests like a man whose greatest wish had been fulfilled, his joy in his daughter's happiness evident to all. Later, as the newlyweds prepared to leave for the small cabin that would be their first home together, Thomas pulled Bryce aside for a private word. "I have something for you," he said, pressing an envelope into his new son-in-law's hand. "A wedding gift." Bryce opened it curiously, then looked up in shock. "Sir, this is too much." "Nonsense," Thomas replied firmly. "It's the deed to the east section of my property, 100 acres, good grazing land with that stream running through it." He held up a hand as Bryce began to protest. "It's not charity, son. Consider it Sophia's dowry if you must. But the truth is, I'm getting older, and that mine takes more of my energy than I like to admit. I need a partner in this ranch, someone who'll help build it into something that will last generations." Bryce's expression shifted from shock to deep gratitude. "I don't know what to say except thank you. I promise I'll make it worthy of your trust." "I know you will," Thomas said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You already have." When Bryce rejoined Sophia by their waiting wagon, his face was alight with barely contained emotion. "What is it?" she asked, noticing the envelope in his hand. "What did Father say to you?" Bryce helped her up onto the seat before answering. "He's given us land, Sophia. 100 acres of the east section." Sophia's eyes widened. "But that's the best grazing land on the property. He says he needs a partner," Bryce explained, climbing up beside her. "That he wants us to build something that will last. Tears of happiness welled in Sophia's eyes. "Oh, Bryce, it's everything we dreamed of, happening so much sooner than we dared hope." As they drove away amid the cheers and well wishes of their friends and neighbors, Sophia leaned against her husband's shoulder, contentment filling her like warm honey. From the terrifying moment in the barn when that bandit had cornered her to this perfect day of promise and new beginnings, what a journey it had been. "What are you thinking?" Bryce asked softly, his arm secure around her waist. Sophia smiled up at him, her heart overflowing with love. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most frightening moments in our lives can lead us to the greatest happiness, if we're brave enough to follow where they lead." Bryce's answering smile was tender as he leaned down to kiss her beneath the vast Montana sky. "And I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest man in the territory, to have found a woman with not just beauty, but such wisdom and courage." As their wagon rolled toward their new home and the life they would build together, Sophia O'Malley Xavier knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the frontier might bring, they would face them together, their love as enduring as the mountains that watched over them and as boundless as the western sky above. 1 year later, Sophia sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Bryce worked with a new colt in the corral they'd built together. The O'Malley Xavier ranch had flourished under their combined care, with Thomas focusing on the mine while Bryce managed the growing herd of cattle. Their cabin had grown 2 additional rooms added as their needs changed. Most significantly, a small nursery now adjoined their bedroom, its window facing east to catch the morning sun. Inside, their 2-month-old daughter slept peacefully in the cradle Bryce had crafted during the winter months while awaiting her arrival. They'd named her Elizabeth, after Bryce's mother, though they already called her Beth, a small, perfect embodiment of their love. Sophia's hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach, where another miracle was just beginning to make itself known. She hadn't told Bryce yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the joyful news that their family would be growing again. As if sensing her thoughts, Bryce looked up from his work with the colt, his eyes finding hers across the distance. The love in his gaze was as powerful as it had been on their wedding day, perhaps even stronger now, tempered by the shared experiences of building a life together. He secured the young horse and walked toward her, removing his hat as he approached the porch. At 30, Bryce Xavier had fully come into his own, confident in his role as husband, father, and rancher. The uncertainties that had plagued him during the bank crisis were long gone, replaced by a steady assurance in the future they were creating. "Beth still sleeping?" he asked, leaning down to kiss Sophia as he joined her on the porch. "Like an angel," Sophia confirmed. "Your father-in-law will be disappointed when he rides over later. He loves watching her while she's awake." Bryce chuckled. "Thomas is the proudest grandfather in the territory. Between the ranch, the mine, and Beth, I'm not sure which he boasts about more in town." "All 3, I suspect," Sophia smiled, "though Beth might have a slight edge." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Bryce's arm around her shoulders, both of them content in the peace of the afternoon and each other's company. "I've been thinking," Bryce said eventually. "With the ranch doing so well, we might consider expanding the house further next spring. Add a proper dining room, maybe another bedroom." Sophia turned to look at him, her eyes twinkling with secret knowledge. "Another bedroom might be a good idea," she agreed. "Especially since we'll need it sooner than you think." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Bryce's expression transformed with wonder. "Sophia, are you saying?" She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday when I went into town. We're having another baby, likely around Christmas." Bryce gathered her into his arms, his kiss filled with such tenderness and love that Sophia felt tears spring to her eyes. When he pulled back to look at her, his own eyes were suspiciously bright. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, our home, our children, our life together." "It's a gift we've given each other," Sophia replied softly, "and one I'm grateful for every day." The sound of an approaching rider drew their attention. Thomas O'Malley appeared on the path, his face breaking into a wide smile when he saw them. "There's my favorite family," he called as he approached. "And how's my granddaughter today?" "Sleeping," Sophia replied, rising to greet her father. "But we have some news that might make up for her being unavailable for grandfatherly spoiling." As they shared their joy with Thomas, whose reaction was everything they could have hoped for, Sophia felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was the life she was meant to live, with these people she loved beyond measure. Later that evening, as she and Bryce stood together on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, she thought back to that fateful day in the barn. How terrified she had been, how certain that only harm could come from being cornered by a bandit with violence in his eyes. Instead, that moment had brought Bryce into her life, brave, honorable Bryce, who had faced down danger without hesitation and declared with such conviction, "You'll be leaving without her." Those words, spoken by a stranger defending a woman he barely knew, had been the beginning of everything good in her life now. From fear had come love, from danger security, from a moment of darkness a lifetime of light. Bryce's arm tightened around her waist as if he sensed the direction of her thoughts. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. Sophia turned in his embrace, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as the last rays of the setting sun gilded them both in gold. "Completely," she whispered against his lips. "In every possible way." And as the stars began to appear one by one in the vast Montana sky, Sophia and Bryce Xavier stood together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the land they loved, their hearts full with the family they had created, a testament to the enduring power of courage, commitment, and a love born in the most unexpected of circumstances.